And with those reporting restrictions lifted, we can turn our attention now to this case of Chris Kaba and the prosecution of the police officer who killed him. It's not failed prosecution, is it? But is it? I suppose it is a failed prosecution. The decision was taken that there was enough evidence there to pursue a criminal trial, but he was acquitted after just 3 hours of deliberations. And the front page I was referring to a moment ago, anger on all sides as Met Officer cleared of murder. And oddly this morning, I started talking to the producer about this case before I'd seen that front page. And I said, and remember, I knew about the details upon which reporting restrictions have been lifted shortly before you did, but I didn't know when I got into work this morning. That's because I work in a newsroom. And it struck me as a very good headline, because one side is, I don't like sides in the context of this conversation. I am on the side of justice. I'm on the side of transparent justice. And I'm also, when it comes to a criminal in the police, I'm on the side of the police. But there is also institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police Service, and there are cases in the past of people being targeted as a consequence of their ethnicity differently from how they would have been had they had a different ethnicity. I am of the view, for the record, that this is categorically not one of those cases, and the details that have emerged in the last 20 minutes speak very much to that conclusion. But both sides, is there a better word to use than sides? Both sides will still be angry. People and I don't want this to turn into a kind of race thing, although my inbox already suggests that it is. That by sides, there are people who think that Chris Kaba was a victim of a miscarriage of justice. And then on the other side, there are people who don't think that Sergeant Martyn Blake should ever have been in court at all. To which and remember, I'm doing this absolutely off the back of the news, but I don't know that this could have gone any, I don't want to say better, but oddly more effectively. So although there are people who will still be convinced that something terrible has happened here, I'm afraid that belief is rather violently undermined by both footage of the events and, of course, the details that have subsequently emerged. Not that the police officer concerned would have known that, which is why it needed to go to trial. So I quite like it when this happens. I'm having a thought that, as far as I'm aware, no one else has had yet. And it's a thought that I had before this press conference was given. It's a thought that I had before these reporting restrictions were lifted, but it's not a thought I would have built a phone in on until the restrictions were lifted. And that thought is this: I think it's gone about as well as anybody could have hoped. There's been a trial, so people worried that somebody black might have been shot in circumstances that had more to do with his blackness than his criminality or the threat that was being posed to the police. They have had a jury trial. They have seen Sergeant Martyn Blake acquitted after just 3 hours of deliberations by a jury of his peers. And I can live with the suggestions and the objections that the trial never should have happened. I tell you what this is about. And you're indulging me, and so I'm grateful to you, because this is really me thinking out loud. So I've got the bit that I couldn't get my head around before. So you get now senior police officers, both ex and current, queuing up to say he should never have been on trial at all, to which I cautiously respond by saying, of course he should, because I have faith in the criminal justice system. Not untrammeled faith, but how can a senior police officer say he should never have come on trial at all unless he's worried that he might have been convicted? Whereas if you have faith in both the innocence of Sergeant Martyn Blake and the probity of the criminal justice system, then you need to have trials, because an acquittal at trial is important. It's not proof that he never should have been prosecuted is proof that the criminal justice system has worked. There were enough questions over the circumstances of that killing to merit an investigation. Enough of those questions went unanswered by the investigation to merit a prosecution. And there was enough evidence in court presented to the jury to merit an almost immediate acquittal. So your opinion on this story shouldn't change when you discover that Chris Kaba was in one of London's most dangerous gangs and would have faced trial for trying to kill a rival in a nightclub shooting had he not been killed himself days later by a police marksman. And of course, his fellow gang members were convicted for that crime. So that shouldn't affect your opinion of this. But the simple question of whether or not that police officer acted in good faith, acted in fear of being mown down by a driver of a car that was known to be associated with a shooting the previous evening, what should have happened differently? Is what I'm asking you in a way. 0345 6060 973. I'm not being contrary. I see a headline that says anger on all sides as Met Officer cleared of murder, and I find myself determined not to be on any side in a story like this because it shouldn't really be about sides. If you're on the side of criminal justice, if you're on the side of justice and you have now learned what has happened here, would it not be the case that you have to tell both supporters of Chris Kaba who were protesting outside the court, in some cases without knowing the full picture, and supporters of Sergeant Martyn Blake who have been protesting all along, knowing more perhaps of the full picture, there had to be a trial, right? And because we live in a society, we live in a system where jury trial is relatively sacrosanct, and also acts as an antidote to the perceived institutional racism of the police service. And this is the only way that the story could have unfolded, albeit that it is hellish for the police officer concerned. And I often get calls from men and women who've served with with SO19, I think it is, who've been armed police officers, and it's a weird job. It's a job that a lot of coppers don't want to do. Whenever we do, shall we arm the police? I get police officers queuing up to tell me that they don't want to carry a gun. But is the trial not an occupational hazard? The idea that the fear of a trial would prevent you from discharging your firearm when you should, that's a powerful argument. That's a powerful argument, but it's not powerful enough to say that you can't scrutinise these sort of cases whenever they occur. So the headline that says anger on all sides as Met Officer cleared of murder, because some people believe Chris Kaba was killed unfairly. Some people in that camp believe he was killed unfairly because he was black. Some people will still believe that, despite the case having shifted slightly, because the idea that the police officer concerned was in fear of his own life, that the police officers genuinely feared that he was going to try and ram his way out of this stop, seems to me to be pretty close to inarguable. But that then shifts the pendulum to the other side of the debate, to use the words on the front of the Times, anger on all sides as Met Officer cleared of murder. He should never have been on trial at all. Police chief says case shows system is broken. Former coppers queuing up to say, that's the bit I can't get my head around. Maybe you can help me. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. This had to happen in the way that it happened, didn't it? This is exactly what should have happened and exactly what needed to happen. And if people are left unsatisfied, that is not something that could have been addressed by a different course of action. It is literally trial by jury. People who bang on about Magna Carta without really knowing what it means, and similar sort of great tropes of ignorant rhetoric, very, very occasionally accidentally know what they're talking about. This is trial by jury. This is evidence presented in an open court to 12 men and women. And they have concluded within 3 hours that nothing illegal happened here. Quite the opposite. They've concluded that when Sergeant Martyn Blake discharged his firearm, he did so because he feared, with good cause, that Chris Kaba was poised to drive his car, to use his car as a weapon, to drive his car at the police officers who were stopping him because the car he was in had been involved in a shooting the previous night, a shooting for which he would have been put on trial if he hadn't been killed. But the second bit doesn't matter. That's why this is not my clearest introduction of all time, because like you, I'm reacting to new information. But that's the point. So everybody's telling me this shouldn't have come to trial. I'm telling you it absolutely should have done. There's a case perhaps for not naming the police officer, so we'll add that to the mix. I wasn't sure what to do there. You'll have noticed when I was talking to Fraser, I didn't say the name, but then Fraser said the name. I think correctly. He's in the Old Bailey. So I've now said the name of but I don't know. Would the police officer rather that I never mentioned his name again? In which case I would completely respect that wish, because he is a completely innocent man doing a job for which we should all be grateful. If no one's doing jobs like that, then people who well, they're murderers, commit more murders. So it is tempting and easy to say that this trial should never have happened, but the acquittal of the sergeant concerned, to me, makes it clear that it absolutely should have done. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. This is not a case where nobody has been satisfied. This is a case where justice has been seen to be done, both for Chris Kaba, his supporters and his family, and for Sergeant Martyn Blake's supporters and his family. I suppose those are your two sides. But justice has been seen to be done, hasn't it? Now, I'm not going to apologise in advance if I've got this horribly wrong. I'm just going to remind you that I'm responding to news that broke at approximately 5 to 11 this morning. But it speaks to something that had been bubbling away in my brain before 10 o'clock today. And that was that this is and it's a horrible story, it's a horrible episode, it's a horrible saga, but it couldn't and shouldn't have unfolded any differently. Should it?